Good morning. This is actually me re-recording from last night, and I am so very sorry that we have internet issues at our house. We've tried many ways to mess with them, but we have too many people pulling too many G's on the internet, and we even upgraded our internet. So here we go. We're going to try again. This is actually video number 3. And last night there were just too many glitches in my video, and I had a lot of questions when it was going on. So I wanted to just redo it real quick on Zoom. But in review of what we've learned so far in the first 2, just to remind you, I'm reading out of this book, Medical Cannabis Handbook for Healthcare Professionals, which is amazing, full of amazing information and studies and sites, sources, and great literature. But the history of cannabis and its success with the use and the experience has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. Cannabis has been used legally by the multiple countries for years and years and years on end. It was first documented in the Chinese pharmacopoeia 2700 BC, meaning it was used long before it was ever documented in that pharmacopoeia. We know from examples I've given before, it was used in Egypt, in India, Russia, China, even the United States. It was in our pharmacopoeia for 90 years, and in England, Scotland, if you count Outlander, if that's legitimate history. And it was so valuable to ancient people that pounds and pounds of cannabis was buried with mummies upon their death. And we recently found that in a Russian mummy, which is so exciting to see the proof come out now, but that we know that people buried things with mummies that were of extreme value that they wanted in their afterlife. So obviously they found great value for health and happiness with cannabis. Queen Victoria's doctor said that when it was pure and administered carefully, that cannabis is one of the most valuable medicines that we possess. In 1936, Lynn Herkenman said that because there are no receptors in the cardiac and respiratory systems of the brainstem, remember I told you those 2 spots that don't have the receptors? These are the areas that shut down the heart and the lungs in cases of overdose. This is the physiological reason why no one has ever died of a cannabis overdose, and why it's one of the safest, if not the safest, medication that we possess on this earth. Let that sink in for a second. The safest medication. And we know that it touches every part of our body. So what part of our body that is untouched that cannabis cannot regulate do we not want it to be a part of? It can help so many things. So after we'd been using cannabis for thousands and thousands of years with great success and great reputation across many countries, Prohibition in the United States hits. So this is around the late 30s. And they put heavy taxes on the physicians for prescribing it, and penalties if they didn't do it right. They put heavy taxes on the pharmacies that sold it, and basically just made it a pain in the butt. And you got to wonder why. Why would they do that? Who benefits from that? And when Nixon was president, he actually put up $4 million to investigate the use of cannabis. His intent was actually to criminalize it, but what was discovered in a 4,000-page results was that they wanted to decriminalize it to the level of acetaminophen and estrogen because it had so many benefits and it was so safe. And that went completely ignored and disregarded. Why? He took a 4,000-page investigation that he paid $4 million for out of the taxpayers' pockets and threw it in the trash can, basically. Why did he do that? So the Marijuana Tax Act served, which we talked about, to make cannabis prescriptions and sales a pain in the butt, forcing people to use pills. This is the dawn of the pill. This is when the pill was invented, with the repression of use of cannabis by those with influence and power. So start thinking about that, y'all. I feel like we have so much more information in our pockets these days than they did then, because this was the time of so many new inventions and so exciting. I can't imagine how exciting it was to have a pill that you could pop, but pills are synthetic, and pills are not from the ground and from the plants and from God. So after thousands of years of successful documented use, why is the US putting the brakes on the use of a plant that has been called the safest medicine on earth? I am learning to be cynical. And who stands to benefit? Who stands to lose? Paper companies, possibly. Hemp was being used for paper. Imagine if you removed paper companies, or you gave less business to paper companies, that affects the logging industry, that affects the loggers, that affects the mills, that affects the mill workers. It goes on down the line, right? Hemp was used for clothing. Imagine cotton. Cotton was huge. That would affect cotton gins. That would affect the pieces of the cotton gins that were made to produce a cotton gin. The owners of the cotton plantations, and possibly slavery. Unfortunately, that was part of that era. There were a lot of things to be affected if one plant could come in and take over and reduce the use of all these other plants. So we talked about discovering the endocannabinoid system and why it works. So 2 doctors at the Hebrew University in Israel published over 400 papers. They own 25 patents on cannabis. They got 27 honors from 6 different countries, highly esteemed. I mean, that is so amazing of all these rewards and recognition that they have. But guess what? Nobody knows who they are. Nobody knows who they are. They should be a global sensation that they discovered the largest receptor system in their body, beating out dopamine, beating out serotonin. It's just the largest receptor system, and nobody gave them any recognition. And why is that? It's because of prohibition. There's not a single organ or body part, barring the 2 parts in the brainstem for the heart and the lungs, that are untouched by the endocannabinoid system. And what molecule fits perfectly, absolutely perfectly, both plant-made and God-made, fit perfectly into that lock and key receptor. That was when we talked about THC is the plant version of anandamide, which is the body version, and CBD, which is the plant version of the 2AG, which is the body version. And they're mirrors, and they fit perfectly. Only God can create that perfection, right? So why would a plant remedy that leaves no part of the body untouched, using a miraculous 2-way highway, remember how the homeostasis works, because it's talking back and forth, providing unprecedented homeostasis between the organs and the brain, allowing the body to continue to be healed, to be outlawed. It just, the more I think about it, the more my heart races, because it just blows my mind. So today we're going to talk about a little bit more about the endocannabinoid system to finish up that part. But no other plant or medicine treats such a wide range of conditions. I'm not a medical professional saying, or doctor saying, that it treats everything in the world, but it treats a whole lot of things. And no other plant or medicine comes close to treating the amount of things that this one cannabis can do for us. We have 5,000, 10,000, I don't know how many drugs we have out there. And then we have this one CBD. The endocannabinoid system is a series of regulatory mechanisms present in all animals with a backbone. So that excludes insects. Everything else has one. That's why we use it for our pets. So you've seen articles about them using it in zoos for elephants and tigers and multiple animals. It's pretty exciting to read about it. The endocannabinoid system is found throughout the central nervous system. Central nervous system is brain and spinal cord. Immune system and tissues in the brain, acting on the GI system. I know I'm beating a dead horse, I'm repeating, but reproductive system, the spleen, the endocrine system, the heart, the circulatory system. It's found in the blood cells. It modulates the flow of neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters keep the nervous system functioning. They're basically what cause the nerve synapses between all the nerves. It affects the circadian rhythms, which is our sleep-wake cycles, variations in blood pressure, peristalsis. Peristalsis is what keeps our food moving through our body and pushing it on down the line, EKG and EEG rhythms. It affects everything, cannabis does. So my first quote that I'm going to read out of here, and I hate reading, but y'all, sometimes I just got to read it to get it right so I don't stutter. But modulating the endocannabinoid system activity may have therapeutic potential in almost all diseases affecting humans, including obesity, including metabolic syndrome, diabetes, diabetic complications, neurodegenerative, inflammatory, cardiovascular, liver, gastrointestinal, skin disease, pain, psychiatric disorders, cancer, chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, among many others. It affects everything. So there's actually 5 cannabinoid receptors that they've identified to date, and Cb1 and Cb2 are the most prevalent, and that's what we talk about the most. We're not going to go into details on those, but it's just important to know that there are multiple receptors that we've identified, probably way more, and they differ in location and what they do. So Cb1 receptors are primary primarily in the central nervous system, like I said, and then the CB2 are primarily in your peripheries, and your peripheries are your hands and your feet, anything away from your core. But CB1 receptors have two landing spots, one for THC and another for CBD, which comes upon my next reading point. So what we're going to say here, that CB1 receptors have at least two landing spots. And as I said, one for THC and one for CBD. When there's a low amount of CBD present, THC occupies the binding site. However, when more CBD is present, it lands in the receptor first and makes THC binding more difficult. This is how CBD modulates the effects of THC, which is important to keep in mind when dosing. So what that means, scrunch down, CBD beats the THC to the receptor sites. So perfect example. I have a friend who said that she and her husband smoked pot, and she takes CBD every single day. And she said that when they smoked pot, she had no effect, but her husband felt it, and they couldn't figure out why. The reason why is because pot is, for the most part, primarily THC, right? You're doing that for the THC, not for the CBD. Well, her receptors were already full with CBD, and so those little THCs couldn't get in there. So that is the exact reason why when we tell you that when you take CBD, there is no high, because the THC is not binding into those receptors. However, they work together. What gets to the receptors first is the CBD, but they work together as a team. And I think it's going to be quoted here in a minute, but it says that they're like a pair of an old couple that fights all the time, but really in the end, they work best when they're together. So it's pretty exciting. Okay, so moving on from there, we want to reiterate the fact that we talk about this two-way street, and that is officially called retrograde inhibition. So retrograde inhibition, the best example is like if you're having seizure activity, there's actually a pharmaceutical that they're trying to, that they use, that's basically all cannabis, to help with seizures. And it's when you have all this electrical activity that's just going crazy and out of control, this two-way street is trying to get it in balance. It's trying to talk back and forth between itself, and it'll slowly, after going from like craziness, it finally starts getting into balance because it starts learning how to use homeostasis for the balance. So that two-way street is how we ultimately heal, because if the brain just fires and it sends a message to your finger that you cut, and it just sends one message, the finger doesn't go back and say, hey, guess what? I'm still hurting. But with the endocannabinoid system, it's, I'm hurting, and the brain says, oh my gosh, it's hurting. I need to send more down there to help with the inflammation. And it sends more, and it goes back and forth, back and forth. And that's why it talks about how good it is for speeding the healing of broken bones. It's always talking to the organs. So exciting. I'm getting out of breath because I'm getting excited about it. So, okay, where are we left off? The endocannabinoid system is critical to human survival. At the most basic levels, it controls how we eat, how we sleep, how we relax, how we forget, and how we protect ourselves. So here we go to get it right. The effects of endocannabinoids, or of cannabinoids thriving, is an unusual topic. And this is what I love, because it does not fit what we have learned about contemporary healthcare models. And what that means is, when I was in school, I was trained in the medical model. The quote medical model means find a symptom and treat it. So an example, I have Crohn's disease, and I had chronic inflammation throughout my gut. And so because that inflammation, after it's been there a long time, it's kind of like a blister, it turns to a callus. And then once it's a callus, you can't do anything with it. So I had multiple surgeries that would go in and cut out that callus. But guess what? I still had a problem. So then another callus would form, and I had to have another surgery. Then another callus would form. That's why I lost so much of my intestine and ultimately my stomach, because all our medical model focuses on is finding the symptom and treating it. However, the problem is that, or the great thing about the endocannabinoid system is that it is profound. It's way too early to weave together a unified theory on how cannabinoids encourage human thriving behavior. Science has identified various interesting clues. Take, for example, forgetting. We think that forgetting is bad. I can't stand it when I can't remember my tennis score. But while most people view forgetting as a memory lapse, Professor Meckelum, he was the doctor, the PhD at Hebrew University, all the amazing accolades, has repeatedly pointed out just how important it is for our brains to edit the torrent of the information that we receive on a daily basis. If we were unable to block out the sights, the sounds, the smells, and other sensory input coming at us while we're driving, we would be paralyzed by the overstimulation, unable to focus, and miserable. And, I have a friend, and this is an example probably of an ECS breakdown, is that she has some sort of brain injury. I can't remember what it was, but if she hears or sees the lights of an ambulance at night when she's driving, she gets captured in them and she just has to follow him, and she can't drive. So when she now as an adult, she knows she sees them coming, she pulls over and she hides her face, because there's something about not being able to look away from the light. But that's why the endocannabinoid system is great, is it promotes thriving. It's not about finding the symptom and treating it. It's about thriving within our bodies. So forgetting is also crucial to treating illnesses like PTSD. This is why we use this so much with our military. Cannabis is known to be useful in helping sufferers eliminate painful memories that lodge in the minds and haunt them often for life. In Dr. Mellencamp's view, certain chemicals lock in memories, and cannabinoids help unlock them or lock them out. Studies with Holocaust survivors and Vietnam War veterans indicate that cannabis effectively eradicates harrowing memories and turns sufferers into zombies. No other medicine does this. There's no other solution. And I can relate to this next paragraph. The same is true with other traumas, phobias, neuroses, and pain. Pain is one of the most difficult experiences to recall once it's over, and that it's evolutionary adaptive. So I had horrible pain after when I was septic, and I still have random irrational moments of tears, which I've been told is PTSD. And I hate saying that because I feel like that's reserved for people who've like seen combat and horrible things. But you don't, for some reason, our brains don't forget pain, or when it's recalled, it's traumatic, if it's a traumatic pain. However, think about the pain that it forgets because of the ECS. How many single child families would there be if women could not forget the pain and agony of childbirth? Cannabinoids play a crucial role in helping humans to forget the pain and to move on. So exciting. Okay, so we're going to learn just a little bit more before we move on, but we want to talk about infants and women. And we can't study, obviously, we don't study the endocannabinoid system or using cannabis on infants or mothers. You'll never be able to do that for the potential risks, right? But we can study it based on cultures. And there was a culture of Rastafarian women in Jamaica, and it was their culture that they drank cannabis steeped tea every day. Kids, adults, everyone. So this is in the early 90s. There was a Dr. Melanie Dreyer traveled to Jamaica to investigate how a group of rural and largely impoverished Rastafarian women used cannabis to maintain their appetite, help them rest, and allay nausea when they were pregnant. These women also serve a mild cannabis tea to their families as a daily health tonic. And do you know why the reason? Because when you're poor, forestalling illness is less expensive than treating it once it hits. Amen. It is so much less expensive to prevent illness than to wait for it to happen. And what do? We are so trained to wait for illness to strike. We need to be more proactive in taking better care of our bodies. We are deficient in this, in cannabis and the things that keep our endocannabinoid system going. And what happens if just in the perfect world, if everybody started taking cannabis or CBD oil as their daily vitamin, what happens? Pharmaceutical industries suffer. Think of the medical professionals that will suffer. They don't have anybody to treat that's sick. They don't have any pharmaceuticals to give out because people feel good. Our system is based on disease. Our system is based on being sick. They want us sick because that's their job. We didn't have hospitals back in the old days. People went to the church to get healed with oils, ironically. I used to think that sounded so crazy to go to the church and have oils put on their head. And I'm like, now I'm thinking that obviously is the best thing ever. They're from the plants. They knew what they were talking about. So, okay, moving on. Dr. Dreher found that the daughters, that they called them the Roots daughters, 30 Roots daughters and their babies for 5 years. She followed them until the school children were of age to go to school, showed that infants and mothers who utilized cannabis socialized better, they made eye contact more quickly, and were also easier to engage than babies of those who did not. The children in the study developmentally, nor were the children in the study developmentally disadvantaged. In fact, the 5-year-old children of the users scored higher on tests for verbal ability, memory, mood, and motor, perceptual, and quantitative skills than children of those who did not use cannabis. Isn't that amazing? Like from the beginning, we talked about the embryogenesis yesterday and how, or 2 days ago, and how we need the endocannabinoid system to be healthy and thriving in order to feed those stem cells and to feed the cells that are farthest away from where the food is in order for them to thrive. Simply amazing. So we also did a study here in the US on rats. It's the best we can do. Poor rats. Hope we're never a rat. But let's see. Science showed that without a functioning endocannabinoid system, newborn rats failed to suckle or begin maternal bonding. They weren't bonding, and they weren't connecting with their mother. Further investigation showed that endocannabinoids are essential to a newborn's ability to thrive as it grows and as it develops. Dr. Fried, another doctor involved with the study, discovered that cannabinoid receptors develop extremely slowly in babies, which is why young children do not experience the psychoactivity when they take cannabis, which is completely contrary to any medical information that we've received in the United States. So they go on to say, is it an evolutionary accident that the two activities necessary to sustain life and perpetuate the species are eating and sex, and that cannabis makes both things more pleasurable? Or as Dr. Alan Howlett, remember him? He was the US doctor who discovered the receptors in the brain for the endocannabinoid system, put to a writer, all of the things endocannabinoids do are exactly what Adam and Eve would want after being thrown out of Eden. You couldn't design a more perfect drug for getting Eve through the pain of childbirth and helping Adam endure a life of physical toil. In other words, cannabinoids help us to cope with the human condition. Amazing. So the last, just as a little review, the THC, let's remember the difference between THC and CBD, but THC, which is also tetrahydrocannabinol, test on that, is the chemical responsible for most of marijuana's psychological effects. It acts much like the cannabinoid chemicals made naturally in the body, and THC bonds to the Cb1 receptors. CBD, or cannabidiol, is one of at least 113 active cannabinoids identified in cannabis. And I can't remember if I said this yesterday or if I just said it on the previous videos, but we've identified 113 different cannabinoids, but there could be more out there. And we see all these stores that are called CBD stores. They could easily be called CBN stores or CBG stores. It just so happens that we know the most about CBD, and CBD actually accounts for 40% of the plant's extract. So CBD is the largest represented cannabinoid. So I'm just going to leave with a few quotes that actually I've mentioned early on when I first started studying CBD, but one of the leading doctors in cannabis research said that the use of CBD oil is going to save more lives than the invention of the sterile surgical technique. Think about that. When the sterile surgical technique came out and keeping the germs out of the hospital and washing our hands and cleaning the area before they operated to keep the germs away. That was huge. That was a huge step. It's a no-brainer to us now, but that was a huge step. But just using cannabis as a prophylactic, as an everyday preventative medicine, is going to save more lives than actually performing a sterile surgery. We know that inflammation is the root of most disease, and if we can eliminate or reduce inflammation and therefore stop the progression of the disease, we can possibly eliminate surgeries, if not a very large percent of them. I know my surgeries, could have prevented. When I was 16, if I had known that I should be taking CBD oil, I firmly believe that I wouldn't have had all the surgeries that I had, nor would I be here talking to you, because I wouldn't have been through the trenches and back. Another quote that is from the National Institutes of Health publication, the NIH. We've all heard of that by now, but cutting edge science has shown that the endocannabinoid system is flawed in almost all pathological conditions. The endocannabinoid system is broken. So when they find an issue, if there is an illness, they look at the endocannabinoid system and it's deficient, it's flawed, it's broken, it's not communicating with the brain. So it stands to reason that modulating the endocannabinoid system activity may have therapeutic potential in almost all diseases affecting humans. Think about that. Write that down. That's amazing. That if we can use this daily to prevent, or even after you're ill to use, it's amazing. So finally, by modulating the endocannabinoid system, CBD and THC can slow, or in some cases stop, disease progression. This is clinically amazing if you think about it amongst the patients, because we currently have 0 pharmacological drugs that will modulate the endocannabinoid system. It's no longer a matter of debating whether cannabis works. Y'all, that's gone. I mean, even since the 2 years that I've been doing this, there's been so much literature come out that's talking about the US version of proving with science and literature that it works. So many doctors want hardcore evidence and they want hardcore science literature, and I love that too. But you also have to go back thousands of years and see how everybody knows that it benefited them. So there's no debating whether cannabis works. The challenge is actually discerning how to use cannabis for maximum therapeutic benefit and how to find your perfect sweet spot, because that is the challenge, is finding the right spot. So I hope that's a better recording than it was before and there weren't glitches. And tomorrow, if I get there, we're going to start studying terpenes and what terpenes mean and how they're in the cannabis and how they affect us. Have a great day.